Stop for a second. Slow down. Because this might be the exact opposite of everything you've been told. You've been trying too hard, and that's exactly why nothing is working. Not because you're lazy, not because you're doing it wrong, but because the force you think is helping you is actually pushing everything away. The harder you chase what you want, the more it slips out of your hands. The more you think about it, the more distant it feels. And that's not bad luck. That's a pattern, a quiet one that most people never notice. What if the real secret to manifesting anything you desire isn't effort, but relaxation? Not giving up, not doing nothing, but reaching a state where your mind stops gripping so tightly. Because here's something most people don't realize. Every time you feel tense, desperate, or impatient, your mind sends a signal that says, it's not here yet. And that signal shapes your reality more than your words ever could. That's why so many people repeat affirmations all day, visualize perfectly, follow every step, and still see no results. On the surface, they are doing everything right, but underneath, there is pressure, there is doubt, there is resistance. And that invisible resistance quietly cancels everything out. There's a lesser-known truth about manifestation that rarely gets talked about. The moments when things finally come together are not the moments of maximum effort. They are the moments of release. The moments when you stop checking, stop forcing, stop needing it so badly. Think about it. Some of the best things that ever happened in life didn't come when you were stressed and trying to control every detail. They came when you were calm, when you were distracted, when you weren't obsessing over the outcome. That's not coincidence, that's alignment. And in this video, you're going to understand exactly why that happens. Not in a complicated way, not with confusing terms, but in a clear, simple way that actually makes sense. You're going to learn why your current approach might be blocking your results without you even realizing it. You'll see how tension silently creates distance between you and what you want. You'll understand why relaxation is not weakness, but one of the strongest states you can be in. And more importantly, you'll discover how to shift into that state without forcing it, without pretending, and without feeling like you're doing nothing. Because relaxation in this context is not about sitting still and waiting. It's about removing the pressure that's been in the way this whole time. There's also something deeper that will unfold as you keep watching. A small shift in perspective that can change how you look at effort, control, and desire itself. Most people skip this part. They stay stuck in a loop of trying harder and harder, thinking the breakthrough is just one more push away. But the truth is, the breakthrough often comes when that pushing stops. And once you truly see this, you won't be able to unsee it. That's why watching this till the end matters. Because the understanding builds step by step. And if you miss the later part, the shift won't fully land. But if you stay, if you let the ideas settle in, something inside you will start to loosen. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to change how you approach everything from this point forward. This is not about instant miracles. This is about removing what's been blocking them. So if you're tired of trying, tired of overthinking, tired of feeling like you're doing everything but getting nowhere, then this might be exactly what you need to hear right now. Stay with this, let it unfold. And if you're ready to start seeing things differently, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to learn is just the beginning. Welcome to the channel. Because this is where it starts to feel heavy. Not on the outside, but inside your mind. You keep thinking about it again and again. You replay the same thoughts. You ask yourself if it's working. You wonder if you are doing it right. And even when you try to stay calm, there is this quiet pressure sitting in the background. You visualize, you affirm, you try to stay positive. You tell yourself that it's coming. But then a few minutes later, you check again. Nothing changed. You look for signs. You look for proof. You scroll, you compare, you wait. And the more you wait, the more aware you become of the fact that it's still not here. That awareness slowly turns into tension. Not always loud, not always obvious, but it's there. It shows up as impatience. It shows up as doubt. It shows up as that small voice asking, what if this never works? So you try harder, you repeat your affirmations with more focus, you visualize with more detail, you push yourself to believe more strongly, but instead of feeling better, it starts to feel forced. Like you are holding something in place, like you are trying to convince yourself of something that doesn't feel real yet, and that creates a gap between what you say and what you feel. And that gap is where the discomfort grows. You wake up thinking about it. You go to sleep thinking about it. It becomes the center of your attention. And at first, that feels like dedication. It feels like you are doing everything right. But slowly, it turns into pressure. Because now it matters too much. Now it feels like everything depends on it. And when something feels that important, your mind doesn't relax. It tightens. It watches every detail. It keeps checking if things are moving. It keeps asking if it's working yet. And that constant checking sends a message, a quiet message that says, it's not here. It's still missing. And even if your words say something else, that deeper message is stronger. That's why it feels like you are doing so much but getting nowhere. Because the effort is there, but the ease is missing. The actions are there, but the alignment is not. And that's the part most people never notice. They focus on what they are doing on the surface. They focus on the techniques, the routines, the steps. But they don't look at the feeling underneath it all. They don't notice the tension behind the effort. They don't see how the need for results is shaping every thought. And that's where everything starts to shift. Not outside, but inside. Because manifestation doesn't come from force. It comes from alignment. It's not about how hard you try. It's about the state you are in while you are trying. And alignment is not something you create by pushing. It's something that happens when you stop pushing. It happens when your mind is no longer in conflict. When your thoughts and your feelings are not pulling in different directions. And that kind of alignment only happens when you are relaxed. Not lazy, not careless, but relaxed in a way that removes the pressure. A state where you are not constantly checking, not constantly worrying, not constantly trying to make it happen right now. Because when you relax, something important changes. You stop resisting. And resistance is not always obvious. It doesn't always feel like fighting. Sometimes it feels like effort. Sometimes it feels like trying your best. But underneath that effort, there is a layer of tension. A layer that says, I need this to happen. I need it now. I can't feel okay until it does. And that layer creates resistance. It creates a push against reality as it is. And that push keeps things in place. But when you relax, that push disappears. You are no longer trying to force reality to change instantly. You are no longer holding on to the outcome so tightly. And when that happens, the resistance fades. And when resistance fades, things begin to move. Not always in a dramatic way, not always instantly, but they start to flow. In a way that feels natural. In a way that doesn't feel forced. Because flow doesn't come from effort, it comes from openness, it comes from allowing. And allowing only happens when the tension is gone. That's the difference most people miss. They think more effort will create more results. But in this case, more effort often creates more resistance. Because effort, when it's driven by urgency and need, carries a certain energy. An energy that says, I don't have it yet, I'm trying to get it, I'm reaching for it. And that energy keeps reinforcing the same state. It keeps you in the position of not having. That's why tension says, I don't have it yet. Even if your words say something else, the feeling of tension carries that message. It tells your mind it's still missing. It tells your actions, keep chasing. It tells your attention, stay focused on the lack. But relaxation sends a different message. It says, it's already mine. Not in a forced way, not in a fake way, but in a calm, steady way. A way that doesn't need constant proof. A way that doesn't keep checking. Because when something truly feels yours, you don't question it every minute. You don't look for signs every second. You don't feel anxious about it disappearing. You just move through your day. And that's the state where alignment happens. That's the state where things begin to match your inner world. But reaching that state is not about adding more steps. It's about removing the ones that are creating pressure. And one of the biggest ones is control. The need to control every detail. The need to make sure everything is happening exactly the way you want. The need to know when it will happen, how it will happen, what it will look like. That need feels like responsibility. It feels like you are taking charge. But in reality, it creates pressure. Because control requires constant attention. It requires constant monitoring. It requires you to stay alert, to stay focused, to keep adjusting. And that constant state of control keeps your mind active. It keeps it tense. It keeps it from relaxing. And when your mind can't relax, alignment can't happen. Because alignment needs space. It needs stillness. It needs a moment where you are not trying to fix everything, where you are not trying to manage every outcome. And that's why control often blocks results. Not because control is bad, but because of what it creates internally. It creates pressure, and pressure tightens everything. It narrows your focus, it limits your perspective. It keeps you locked into one way of thinking, and that makes it harder for things to shift. Because change requires openness. It requires flexibility. It requires a state where new possibilities can enter. And that state doesn't exist when you are gripping too tightly. That's why manifestation isn't about gripping tighter, it's about letting go. Letting go of the need to force. Letting go of the need to check constantly. letting go of the idea that everything depends on your effort alone. Because when you let go, you create space. Space for things to move. Space for things to come together. Space for alignment to happen naturally. And that space changes everything. Not in a dramatic instant way, but in a quiet, steady way that builds over time. Now the shift begins in a very quiet way. Not big, not dramatic, just a small pause. Right here is where most people try to add something new. Another method, another technique, another rule to follow. But this is not about adding more. It's about doing less in the right way. It starts with a pause. A real pause. Not scrolling, not thinking about the next step. Just stopping for a moment and noticing how tight everything feels inside your mind. The constant movement, the constant checking, the constant trying to figure it out. And instead of reacting to that, you simply pause. You give yourself a second where nothing needs to be solved, nothing needs to be fixed, nothing needs to be controlled. And in that small pause, something softens. It might feel unfamiliar at first, almost uncomfortable, because you are used to doing something all the time. You are used to staying mentally active. But this is different. This is the moment where you begin to step out of that loop. Then comes the breath. Slow, natural, not forced, just a simple breath in and a simple breath out. And as you breathe, you allow your body to settle. You don't try to change your thoughts. You don't try to push anything away. You just breathe and let things be as they are. And with each breath, the tension starts to loosen a little more. Not completely, not instantly, but enough to create space. And in that space, you begin to let go mentally. Not by force, but by choice. You stop holding on to the outcome so tightly. You stop replaying the same thoughts. You stop trying to make something happen right now. And instead, you shift into a different state. A state where you act like it's already handled. Not in a fake way, not in a way where you are pretending, but in a quiet, steady way. A way where you don't feel the need to check every second. A way where you don't feel the need to prove anything to yourself. Because when something is handled, you don't obsess over it. You don't question it constantly. You simply move on with your day. And that's the next part of the shift. Moving through your day without chasing it. Doing your normal activities. Talking, working, resting, living. But without that background pressure. Without that constant pull toward the outcome. You still want it. You still care. But you are not chasing it anymore. You are not running after it with urgency. You are allowing it to come to you. And that changes the entire dynamic. Because chasing creates distance. But allowing removes it. And the more you practice this, the more natural it starts to feel. At first, your mind will try to go back to old patterns. It will try to check again. It will try to analyze. It will try to bring back that sense of control. But each time that happens, you return to the pause. You return to the breath. You return to that simple decision to let go again. And over time, that becomes your new default. A calmer state, a steadier state, a state where you are not constantly reacting. And that's where the deeper understanding starts to settle in. Relaxation is not just a feeling, it's a form of trust. It's a quiet signal that says everything is okay even if you don't see it yet. And that trust changes how you experience everything. Because when you trust, you don't rush. When you trust, you don't force. When you trust, you don't feel the need to control every detail. You allow things to unfold. And that allowing opens the door to receiving. Because receiving doesn't happen when you are closed off, tense, and focused on what's missing. It happens when you are open, calm, and willing to let things come as they are. So relaxation becomes trust, and trust becomes receiving, not as a concept, but as a real experience. You begin to notice it in small ways, in how you react less, in how you feel lighter, in how you are not as attached to immediate results. And that lightness creates a different kind of energy, one that doesn't push things away, one that invites things in. Because you don't attract what you want, you attract what you allow. And allowing is not about giving up. It's about removing the barriers you created without realizing it. The tension, the doubt, the constant need to check, those are the barriers. And as they fade, what you have been trying to bring into your life no longer meets resistance. It finds space, it finds a way. And this starts to feel real when you look back at your own experiences. Not in theory, but in memory. Think about the last time something came easily. Not because you forced it. Not because you planned every detail. But because it just happened. Maybe it was a conversation, an opportunity, a moment that felt right. You weren't chasing it. You weren't overthinking it. You were simply there, and it unfolded naturally. That's the state you are moving toward. A state where things don't feel like a struggle. A state where outcomes don't feel so far away. Because you are no longer creating distance with tension. You are creating closeness with ease. And the more you sit with this idea, the more it starts to make sense in a deeper way. You begin to notice how often things work out when you are relaxed. How often clarity comes when you stop trying so hard to find it. How often solutions appear when you step back instead of pushing forward. And that pattern repeats itself again and again. Not as coincidence, but as a reflection of your state. So you continue practicing the shift. Not perfectly, not all the time, but consistently enough to feel the difference. You pause when you notice tension. You breathe when your mind starts to race. You let go when you feel yourself gripping too tightly. And you return to that quiet state where things feel handled, where things feel allowed, where things are not being chased every second. And in that state, something begins to change. Not just outside, but inside first. A sense of ease replaces the pressure. A sense of trust replaces the doubt. And that inner shift slowly shapes your outer experience. Not because you forced it, but because you stopped blocking it. And that's where the real transformation begins to take root. Quietly, steadily, without needing constant attention. Maybe the problem was never your effort. Maybe it was the tension behind it. All this time you were pushing, trying, holding on so tightly, thinking that more effort would bring you closer. But it only made everything feel heavier. And now something starts to shift. Not because you added more, but because you finally allowed yourself to release what was in the way. That quiet pressure, that constant need to control, that feeling of chasing something just out of reach. It begins to fade. And in its place there is space. A calm kind of space where things don't feel so forced anymore. Where you don't feel like you have to prove anything every second. Where you can simply exist without that weight on your mind. And in that space something powerful happens. You start to feel different, lighter, steadier, more at ease with where you are. Even before anything changes on the outside. And that's the point where everything begins to turn. Because when you stop fighting reality, reality stops resisting you. When you stop chasing, what you want stops running. When you relax, you step into a state where receiving becomes natural, not something you have to struggle for. This is not about doing nothing. It's about doing things from a place of ease instead of pressure. It's about trusting without constantly checking. It's about allowing without trying to control every detail. And once you feel this shift even slightly, you will notice how different everything starts to look. The same goals, the same desires, but without that heavy energy attached to them. And that changes the entire experience. So if something in this video made you pause, if something felt real, if even a small part of this started to click inside you, don't ignore it. Stay connected to this way of thinking, because this is where the real change begins, not in forcing outcomes, but in changing how you approach them. Subscribe to the channel so you don't lose this momentum. Like this video so it reaches more people who are stuck in that same cycle of trying too hard. And share it with someone who needs to hear this right now. Someone who is doing everything but still feeling stuck. Because sometimes all it takes is a small shift in perspective to unlock something much bigger. And sometimes, the moment you relax, is the moment everything arrives.